All right. Good late afternoon, early evening. Thank you, all of you, for joining us for this sixth gathering within the project Fragments of Repair. I'm Maria Hlavajová. I'm artistic director here at BAK, Basis for Actuele Kunst in Utrecht, and I'm really thrilled to welcome you, all of you here. How do you call it? In real life. And of course, everybody online. Welcome to this sixth gathering, which takes place in the context of the multi-part project Fragments of Repair, convened by BAK with artist Kader Attia and the Colonial Forum La Colonie in Paris. Now, the project Fragments of Repair is composed of three main fragments. The exhibition here at BAK, and I really invite everybody who can come to see this wonderful exhibition. You're very welcome. Second part, La Colonie Nomade in Paris, a collective study program conceptualized by feminist and decolonial activist and educator Françoise Verger, and a series of gatherings like this one. So I can do really just a welcome to this wonderful crowd here who use this opportunity. A little opening, I think, in a relatively critical point in the Netherlands again. I fear, and I hope I'm absolutely wrong, but I just heard that the online sound doesn't work. But I'm still happy you're here. So I'm going to try to do this again. Welcome, everybody, both here in person at BAK and online for this hybrid on-offline event. I'm Maria Hlavajová, artistic director here at BAK, Basis for Actuele Kunst in Utrecht. And it's wonderful to be here for this session. Now, I already started with this introduction, but I'll repeat it again, that the Fragments of Repair, for those who are not familiar, is composed of three parts, three fragments, if you will. One is this wonderful exhibition here at BAK. The other fragment is La Colonie Nomade in Paris, a collective study program conceptualized by feminist and decolonial activist and educator Françoise Verger, and series of gatherings like this one today, which consists of just about fortnightly conversations, lectures, screenings, and assembling together around the theory and practice of repair. The project has been conceptualized by Kader Attia and Witske Maas, but also very much in conversation with many others, with colleagues here at BAK, and especially in developing the program for La Colonie Nomade in conversation with Françoise Verger and Alex Hugonnier. Thank you, everyone. As is clear, I'm sure, bringing this project together has been and continues to be a vast collective effort. And even if I am unable to name everyone, I'd like to mention special words of thanks to the team bringing you today's sessions from behind the scenes at BAK. Production is led by Thomas Orbon and head of public practice Hide van Groningen, with assistance by Nina Spa. And the live stream is being taken care of by Ruben Hameling and Jasper Verburg, and communications broadly by Olga Leonard. Very importantly, on behalf of BAK, I would like to really thank all these collaborators of this project, that is all individuals and organizations who have made this project possible by generously sharing their resources of knowledge, time, energy, as well as funds. And with the latter, special thanks for all financial support we received to bring this project into its various unfoldings. To sketch really in a nutshell what Fragments of Repair is, it is a project that looks from many, many different perspectives at the notion of repair as decolonial repair, which artist Kader Attia proposes as a tactic to engage with mental health as a social and political urgency in a world wounded through the global pandemic. Of course, injury, wound, and repair have been pivotal themes across Kader's artistic practice, especially in relation to the material and immaterial workings of coloniality that, as we know, persists into the present. Now, this program is titled Invisible Bridges, and Stefania and Kader will broach many invisible bridges on the question of repair and the irreparable vis-à-vis madness, art, and dreaming. Kader and Stefania will join us from Berlin and Berkeley, California, respectively, and I will introduce them and welcome them after the screening of some selected fragments of Reason's Oxymoron. Perhaps a couple of words about the work itself. This is 18-channel video installation by Kader, Reason's Oxymoron from 2015, which is also currently exhibited here as part of Fragments of Repair exhibition at BAC. And it inquires into ways of dealing with trauma and injury by bringing together various culture, medical, ritual, and artistic practices and perspectives regarding subjectivity, the psyche, and imagination from around the world. The culture specificity of the concept of repair developed, as said, across 18 video chapters, are archived under various headings such as reason and politics, the magical sciences, religion, language, modernity, capitalism and schizophrenia, ancestors and neuroses, the group and the individual, etc. The interviewed protagonists hold a wealth of expertise in fields ranging from psychiatry to ethnography, storytelling, shamanism, philosophy, history, music, and more. By employing both the intuitive and the rational, Reason's Oxymorons refuses to succumb to reproducing some simplistic binaries and unfolds instead as a multivocal and multi-perspectival archive, pondering the human condition of social, psychical, and emotional interdependence. In the exhibition, the videos are installed on computer monitors, as many of you may have seen already, inside somewhat anonymous, standardized, prefabricated gray office cubicles. Prototype at the height of Western modernist utopia as the shining example of and for autonomy, flexibility, and progress, the cubicle became instead a signifier of the architecture of control, as well as the atomization, precarization, and disposability of workers. And of course, in the midst of a pandemic reality, we find ourselves in the distancing barrier that are put up between ourselves and others. Yet, despite this post-panoptic architecture of surveillance, the visitor is invited to freely chart their own course through the maze in a way that challenges its spatial compartmentalization, forming connections between perspectives that collectively probe new pathways towards decolonial repair. And as I have been speaking, I think you have seen some images from the installation of Reason's Oxymorons here at BAC. Important to know, of course, that seeing a flat representation of the installation like this does not quite adequately reflect the layeredness, a rich layeredness of this remarkable work, and how the combined narratives of the interviewees indeed disrupt the starkly gridded appearance of the work. All right, welcome back everybody. I'm glad we managed to synchronize the online time with off. And this is a wonderful opportunity to welcome Kader Attia and Stefania Pandolfo. Welcome, thank you for joining us. And before passing the screen to Kader and Stefania, let me bridge a few words to introduce them. Now, in this conversation, medical anthropologist Stefania Pandolfo and artist Kader Attia will draw from their respective work as an anthropologist and an artist who in parallel ways have reflected on madness, culture and repair in modernity and coloniality, and have explored the spaces and capacities of transversal forms of care. Invisible bridges enabling passages, transferences and translations between medical, ritual and artistic practices toward the reactivation of desire and the possibility of dreaming. Stefania and Kader will explore the capacity of such bridges to produce a shift in the coordinates of the real, carrying us beyond the boundary of the visible and the invisible, the living and the dead, to produce uncanny and unexpected angles from which to feel, think and see otherwise. Artistic, psychoanalytic, and mediumistic practices explore the gaps, silences, and voids of modernity and reason. May these traumatic cuts be also an abyss which could grant us an access to an otherwise. Let me thus introduce the speakers. I believe Kader does not need much introducing, but I'm going to do it nonetheless. He's an artist who explores the wide-ranging effects of Western culture, hegemony, and colonialism. Central to his inquiry are the concepts of injury and repair, which he uses to connect diverse bodies of knowledge, including architecture, music, psychoanalysis, medical science, and traditional healing and spiritual beliefs. Throughout his multimedia practice, ranging from sculpture to film installation, a reparation does not mark a return to an intact state, but instead makes visible the immaterial scars of psychic injury. And this approach is informed by Kader's experience of growing up between Algeria and the Paris banlieues. Kader's work, as we know, has been shown in biennials and major art spaces across the world, too many to name here. So I will just point out some of the most recent exhibitions, which include the Museum of Repair, State of Concept in Athens, 2021, Kader Attia, Remembering the Future in Kunsthaus Zurich in Zurich 2020, the Museum of Emotion, the Hayward Gallery, London 2019, Scars Remind Us That Our Past is Real, Fundación Miro, Barcelona 2018, etc., etc., etc. In 2016, Kader founded La Colonie in Paris's Gare du Nord area as an open space for decolonial thinking, debate, and culture activism. Kader has been appointed curator for the 12th Berlin Biennial in 2022, and he lives and works in Berlin and Paris. And Stefania, welcome. Stefania Pandolfo, who grew up in Naples and spent her life between Italy, Morocco, and the United States. She's professor of anthropology and Middle Eastern studies at the University of California, Berkeley, and member of the programs in critical theory and medical anthropology. Her work centers on subjectivity, imagination, memory, and the experience of madness, with a focus on the Maghreb and Islam, and in conversation with psychoanalysis and Islamic thought. In recent years, her research and writing have reflected on forms of the subject and ethics straddling psychical, political, religious, and aesthetic processes and vocabularies in the confrontation with illness and social crises, including the question of burning, which is how migrancy is conceived of from the other side of the Mediterranean, in the context of psychiatric hospital care and of Islamic healing of the maladies of the soul. She continues to be interested in the potentiality and political impasses of psychoanalysis today as a practice of the unconscious and on the inside that can be drawn from its encounter with forms and conceptualizations of alterity in other traditions of the psyche and the soul. She's the author of Impasse of the Angels, Scenes from a Moroccan Space of Memory from 1997, and Not of the Soul, Madness, Psychoanalysis and Islam 2018, and with Anne Lowell Vina Das and Sandra Laugier, Facing Disasters, a four-voice conversation about madness, care, and the great collective distress from 2013. Also of note is that in 2019, Stefania co-curated an exhibition of Kader's work at the Berkeley Art Museum titled J'accuse, the same title as Kader's 2016 installation, including wooden busts carved by Senegalese craftspeople based on profoundly injured French World War I veterans. And before I, at long last, hand over to Stefania and Kader, just two brief practical notes. Around 40 to 50 minutes into the conversation, we'll open up to questions from the public here and on Zoom. Please, those who joined us online, use Q&A Zoom function, and I'll relay these questions as well as any other question from our audience here at the back. Secondly, please note this conversation is recorded and will be made available in the days to come on BUC's website and YouTube channel. Thank you so very much, and I hand over to our guests.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you
Maria.
very much. Hi, Kader.
Hi.
And thank you. And we are continuing an ongoing conversation here. So You want to say 2 words? Or just say 2 words, both of us, and then we'll speak, like, taking turns. It's frozen. Oh.
You with me, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I am.
Okay,
Kader,
yeah,
I think you are to start.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much, Maria. And of course, we are delighted to be with you tonight, physically for the people who are at back and online for the others. And I think I can't wait to start. Maybe Stefania, you can start.
Yeah, I will start. So just as I was saying, this is the continuation of an ongoing conversation with Kader, and which actually started among ourselves around this film, Oxymorons of Reason, and also his other video, Reflecting Memory, and some of his installations. But because both of us have actually met around this question of madness, and to which in different ways with which we have both a familiarity and a sensibility. And I have worked in a psychiatric hospital in Morocco, but also in other places for a number of years as an anthropologist, as a medical anthropologist, as an ethnographer. And the voices in the film, the things that are said, the questions that are asked resonates intimately for me. And you know, from the beginning, when we started talking about this question, I noticed the familiarity that we both have, that is born of the fact of having lived alongside this enigmatic question, a question that Wittgenstein has called the question of the difficulty of reality. In my own work, as well as in Kader's installations and film, another question that is central to Oxymorons of Reason, which is the question of the relationship of madness and culture, is crucial. And so what is the relationship of psychiatry and psychoanalysis with other approaches to psychic life and what is called mental illness, and to the experience of illness itself, in the parallelism, if we can call it this way, with other cosmologies and traditions of the cure. And the way this has appeared in my work, while Kader's work, particularly in this film, has focused particularly on his experiences in West and East Africa, where he maybe will be talking about it, where he lived for some time in his life. For me, my work has focused more in Morocco and in the Maghreb, in a context in which liturgies occur in parallel and you know, on the side of the practice of psychiatry or psychoanalysis, are related to Islam and to the experience of encountering spirits, jinn entity, invisible entities that are treated within liturgical cures within which there is Quranic recitation. So let me move quickly for like a couple of minutes just to say something about the film itself. So the film Oxymorons of Reason, the way I see it, is constructed like an oxymoron. So like a sort of a term that contains a bipolarity within itself. Reason opens up to an outside. And it is constructed, as you saw in the installation, through a set of cubicles that is at once a structure of control and surveillance, as Maria was saying, suggesting an office space, but also an archive. And in any case, a modern utilitarian organizational space and a grid, but also we could say a cognitive space that is an archival and possibly a brain. And we can think, when we see this, of Foucault's Histoire de la Folie, history of madness in the Age of Reason, and Foucault's talking about the impossibility of encountering the experience of madness other than through what he called an archaeology of its silence, or a monologue of reason about madness. And yet the film shows something else. It shows as well something else. The reason opens up into his aporias, into his oxymorons. So when we see the viewer walking through the cubicles, and watching the multiple chapters of the videos one by one, we see the viewer having to take upon a path, which is a path of listening to a chorus of discrepant voices. So, and the camera, and this is something that perhaps Kader would be talking about more, opens up a third space in these interviews that are interviews with experts, but because of the camera, because of the voice of the artist interviewer, because of the kind of intimate space that is open up and the mise en abîme of the camera, something else can be felt and can be shown. So even though the interviews are thematically organized, and the interviewees are psychiatrists, psychoanalysts, ethno-psychiatrists, anthropologists who study traditions, who convey knowledges. And what we encounter in those interviews are also moments of moving beyond knowledge, moments of hesitations, moments of intimacy, in which the encounter with another tradition of healing, or the encounter with the psyche of patients of in European hospitals, of people coming from the path of migration, as in the work of some of the psychiatrists that I interview, we can hear the psychiatrists telling us that they are attempting, like, for instance, a Moroccan psychiatrist and psychotherapist working in Switzerland, telling us of his attempt to enter the world of the patient. Je rentre avec lui dans son monde, he says in French, both in the sense of the subjective world of the patients, but also the other worlds inhabited by ancestral spirits, by jinn, by parental voices, by traumatic returns that manifest themselves otherwise than in the known vocabularies and psychiatric semiologies of global diagnosis, and even even than in the vocabularies of psychoanalysis. It tells us, for instance, I abandon the books behind me and I move into an unknown world. And when instead of flashbacks, we hear the voice of a Syrian mother, or when in a very touching moment in the film, we hear a Rwandan psychiatrist, Christine Uwimana, talking about her own experience of being herself a survivor of the Rwandan genocide, but also and her own recurrent nightmares. But also she tells us how the nightmares are not just a symptom, they're also an encounter with the dead, a way to maintain a connection and a living relationship, to pay homage to the dead. And so in all of these moments that are deeply touching moments, we see a moving beyond of the register of knowledge into an experience which is an encounter with madness, at the limit of the possibility of an encounter with madness, which perhaps is best articulated by the Cameroonian psychiatrist, Jacques-Philippe Salatsala, who that you just watched, who tells us that when people say, this is the section on language, when people say, I don't understand, or when people say, I cannot see anything in the hospital, they're actually pointing to something that is beyond understanding, or they're pointing to something that is at the register of the invisible. And then the therapist has to welcome this, has to open up to the capacity to sort of create space for the invisible as a mode of listening. And which leads me to a question that I actually want to ask Kader, of the relationship of this film with some also of his other installations. And we constructed a PowerPoint that we can to which we can come back in a second, in which a few images have been selected. We selected them together, and sort of opened the question of what does it mean to move into the interstices of reason? What does it mean? What does the camera enable how can the camera register an experience of madness, and in what ways there are moments in the film. You saw, I think, the last scene in which you hear the voice of a traditional therapist in Malawi reciting in the dark, and that dark is actually the way in which we are given access to a space beyond what can be said in the form of knowledge, even when the knowledge would be a knowledge of African energies, forces, spirits, ancestral spirits. There is something that registering that in the mode of an experience forces us, moves us outside of ourselves in another space, which is the space that in the end is enabled by the installation and is enabled by this experience of art, but it's at the limit of an experience of cure, repair, and the irreparable, as some of Kader's other work has pointed out. And just one last word about the film. I wanted to point out to a very beautiful passage by the Senegalese psychiatrist Momar Gueye, with whom Kader and I have also had more extended conversation in other settings. And we had actually invited him to Berkeley to dialogue with us. Who was talking about the possibility of thinking of the African, of the Senegalese ancestral spirits of the Rab as something they may actually have something in common with the Freudian unconscious, with Freudian concepts such as the concept of the drive, in a kind of exchange or translation of space of proximity and commensurability with psychoanalysis itself and with the concept of the unconscious in psychoanalysis, as if the unconscious was not just a Western concept. And in fact, the unconscious is not, as I argue in my own work, not a Western concept. It's a concept that carries in Western practice something which has the memory of other traditions, both in the West and elsewhere. And I can say something more about this, but I will pass on to Kader now.
Yeah, thank you, Stefania. Very interesting. I will answer your question later, but first, I think it's important. I was listening to you and I was thinking about the audience in back and online. And I have to say that Reasons Oxymoron is a project that I've been working on for many years, but there is one thing I really want to share with you is why I did this project. How come that I wanted to do this project? I wanted to go to Africa, etc., which is basically a project that addressed the question of psychopathologies from, let's say, the perspective of Western modernity, the reason, and non-Western or non-Western modernity or pre-modern time of something else. When I was a kid, my sister was ill, actually. She was epileptic. And my father, and this is a story of migration, because I'm talking about people living in the suburb of France. My father was very close to the communist community, particularly to a guy who was running with him an association, French, who had also a son who was epileptic. And my father was super sad because his daughter was epileptic. She was 11 years old. And one day, his friend, Monsieur Blanchet, told him, you should bring her to the hospital. They will treat her very well. Here in France, we have everything modern, and they will keep her. And my father was a bit skeptical, so he asked my mother, and my mother was a bit lost. And the story is that she asked to a friend who was a Jewish grandmother living alone on the first floor of the building, Madame Abécassis, from Constantine, who told her, I looked at your daughter, and the disease that she has comes from Algeria. It's inside her. So my mother spoke with my father and told him, she's possessed. We need to bring her to Algeria. And we need to find someone. And the mother of my father was a traditional healer. This is something important to know also. They had a kind of fight because my father was convinced that he was very much in this communist modern, idea that science can solve everything. And my mother managed to bring herself to Algeria. And to make a long story short, my sister Aisha spent a year in the mountains with my grandmother Imuna, and she's been healed. So, whereas Ludovic, the son of Monsieur Blanchet, I think it's still in a psychiatric hospital today, because the treatment that was we back into Michel Foucault and History of Madness here. I'm talking to you about the end of the 70s. The epilepsy at that time was still like treated as a mental illnesses. Of course, there were scientific drugs, and there were products that were given to the epileptic patients, so-called to heal them. But in the end, they were just like knocking down them, and also not only to just make them less alive, sleepy, but just also to control them and to merge them into a community where they did not belong to. An epileptic person, for sure, is not someone who has mental health problem. So I'm asking into Olivier Galaverna in one of the films this question because of Reason is Oxymoron. And I wanted to tell you because I think it's important to know why I did this project. The second thing is that, indeed, I spent my last 30 years, 20 years wondering what has happened in the mountain of Algeria with my grandmother. And I have to say that through these decades, there were so many pathways to try to just be part of this conversation in the darkness of the mountain. That's why there is this reference in the film also. That came through politics, through science, of course philosophy, and that for me helped me to understand that this complex conversation that has started basically within the colonization of non-Western lands, particularly what Montmargay referred to when he's saying that when the white, I'm quoting him, when the white men arrive here, he look at the black subject and he thinks he has nonsense because he seems to be always happy. But because this black officer or even psychiatrist, doctor, has never tried to go further than the subject into the society and the village to understand, if you want, how the society is structured with the marabout, the traditional healers, the way that the role of the marabout is basically listening exactly like a psychoanalyst is doing, except that he's not listening a unique person, he's listening the whole community. And I think what I found extremely important is, helped me to understand question that I was wondering to myself, particularly the very handless, extremely complex question of repair. In the sense that the repair for me is absolutely interdependent to injury. So here we go into your question, Stefania, because when you tell me that, when you refer to these interstitial spaces that we can find inside the blocks, the concrete blocks of Rocher Carré, in these cracks that are on the beams that are exhibited at back, in all these faults, basically, in all these, cracks, therefore, injuries. I think that the camera has this capacity to play the role of a therapist, basically. And what I have discovered, of course, by interviewing therapists, for instance, it's not only the mise en abîme. Most of the time, these people are listening, they're not speaking. But it's also the fact that the camera by itself, Malak Ben Ismail says it very also clearly in the film, is this director from Algeria whose father was the director of the psychiatric hospital of Constantine and also did this incredible movie, Alienation. He said that in the end of the day, the camera, particularly with documentary, not fiction, is really playing the role of the therapist, in the sense of the listener, in the sense that the injury, which is, again, for me, inherent to the repair, you cannot separate them, express clearly itself in a very subtle way in front of a camera, particularly when you're doing a documentary. Because a documentary opens the voice of the people. And that's why most of the time what I wanted to do is that it was difficult, but I asked to all people I had chance to interview to just improvise, to really be in the atmosphere of a conversation, like a little bit we are doing here. Why? Because I think that any conversation, even a conversation between a healer, a traditional healer, and a patient, create a collective individual, bring these separated psyche that are the individual with their own pulsions, etc. It actually, even from even the opposite pulsions, the pulsion of life and pulsion of death, I think that the conversation create this individuation. It create, as I always refer to this Gilbert Simondon theory, that individuer is a verb, it's not a name, it's not individual. I'm not talking about individualism. On the contrary, I'm talking about how to be yourself in a collective. So exchanging knowledge, this is what we are doing now. Probably, I'm sure, pulsions. This is unfortunately what is happening now a lot with social media. And I think what I found important in this project is that even the camera is an individual. The camera becomes an individual, and there is a conversation between the person who asks, I mean, me, the Momar Gay, for instance, the person who is interviewed or is supposed to speak, and this object. And this object offers really, again, a crack, so that not only the voice and the knowledge and many things can get in, but also things that we cannot control, we cannot even understand, but they are here, unconsciously.
Maybe this is a moment to show the images of Rocher Carré. Thomas, if you can show them. So this is the installation. It's a photographic installation that Kader was referring to. It's and that I had the idea of bringing it in because those cement blocks. There are 3 images. Maybe you can just show them in a sequence. Yeah. And then the third is the most uncanny, when you come close to the cement blocks and you see cracks. And then you can you are at the portal, at the gate of another world, of a world that is, in Arabic you would say it's batin, it's invisible, it's withdrawn, it's not given to the experience of the senses in the same way, or it's unconscious. And if you go back to the first image for a second, this is, these are cement blocks in the just outside Algiers, and they're being put in recent years in the place on top of a beach where undocumented migrants would land with their boats to prevent the landing, to prevent migrants to depart or to land, and particularly to depart towards Europe, to use this beach as a place of departure, as a place of journey. And now we can see how they are at the same time a barrage, a barrier. They are this kind of geometrical kind of emblem of a kind of colonial and post-colonial modernity. But they have been also reappropriated. They have become a place to sit and look at the horizon and look at the crack within the rocks, and a place to dream, where the dream is a dream that is born from within a nightmare, is born from within the place of a prison, is born from within the kind of claustrophobia that is driving the desire to leave countries from which there is undocumented migration. And yet, so it's a dream that is never a dream as opposed to the nightmare. It's a dream that is itself an oxymoron. It's a dream that is both, creative and born of an experience of death and destruction without ever resolving the two terms, which is a little bit what we see in the film that we just saw, and more in general is something that we encounter in Kader's use of the concept of reparation, which is profoundly kind of connected with the idea of irreparability and the idea of something that is born of a fundamental experience of violence. So shall we stay? We have like maybe 15 more minutes left for our conversation. Kader, so
Yeah, I think I was listening to you about this dream, and definitely when we look at the both Raisons Oxymoron and the photograph of Rocher Carré, the impression that is left to us is the dream. Of course, today I will speak to you now, probably 5 years after these works. Even Rocher Carré was in 2007. And I mean, I have to say that as an artist, it's extremely interesting to look at a work that has been done 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and see how it either it doesn't speak anymore, or on the contrary, it is still not even totally contemporary, but it was carrying in its aesthetic signs that were premonitory. If we think about the dream here, in both the Raisons Oxymoron and the photograph of Rocher Carré, for me, there is definitely first the oxymoron of what is a dream, in the sense that a dream can be a dream by night and a dream by the day. In French, we said un rêve diurne et un rêve nocturne. Diurne means the day, nocturne means night. The second aspect that I found extremely important in terms of psychoanalysis and psyche, let's say, related to the dream, is that it binds us today to a conversation that I was not thinking about it 10 years ago, because I was not, I mean, I did not read Bernard Stiegler, Catherine Malabou, who spoke, by the way, in our program, and others, Shoshana Zuboff on capitalism and surveillance. And I think actually the crucial and so important stake that we have to care about regarding the dream is that it defines us, it defines our consciousness. I don't think that dream have to do with unconsciousness at all. I think a dream is conscience, it's consciousness. And there are many neurologists like Khalifa, I'll send you the book later, who have clearly defined that, against Freud, that dream are conscious. So why, for me, it is extremely important? Because I do believe, like Bernard Stiegler has explained clearly, much better than me, that the way that capitalism has completely hijacked our individuation, I was talking about before, is by automatization, by the automatization of our dreams. When you look at Rocher Carré, now, when I watch these people watching the horizon, and I remember, because there are still today people watching the horizon, willing to live, I really have the feeling that the agency that moves us, that I call Reaper, is part of a struggle between what the consciousness is producing in terms of technology, from the silex to the algorithm, and this very deep, extremely obscure agency of being conscious. This movement from the self, from inside to the outside. What Soleiman Bashir Diagne called in the film that is also in the exhibition of Bach, emotion. His motion, as I think I told you, but I just want to remind, I think it's an important detail, I also discovered it a year ago, come from the French word motion, which come from the Latin word emovere, ex movere, meaning a movement from the inside to the outside. And it's extremely interesting to do, for instance, a parallel with the Arabic, where you can find words such as al-mashair, for instance, that has to do with poetry only. That means that emotion is only linked by an experience lived with poetry, for instance.
Let me just jump in on
Yes.
this, because it actually relates very directly with what you're saying. We're going to move on to this question of the bridge, right? And the question of the bridge that moves inside and outside one's own world, in both literal and metaphorical terms. And so we thought that I want to sort of introduce the elements of one of the stories that I have written about that is actually precisely about this movement of something outside of oneself in an experience of illness that borders of the possibility of a kind of prophetic experience through a dream, which is also a delusion, the border of dreaming and delusion, without opposing these terms as good and bad, healthy and ill, but instead attempting to inhabit precisely that space in between. And Thomas, if you could show from the PowerPoint the first image. Yeah, this, okay. So this, it is a story that I have written about a story that I tell about in my book, Not of the Soul, of a man that I call Ilyas. This is not his real name, who painted the walls of his apartment when he had an episode of madness, in a mad state. And then he started wandering the city, the countryside, and eventually returned in a melancholy state. And he found refuge in his home and started painting the walls home. And particularly this image, which is, if you can imagine, it is an entire wall of a very small room and is completely encompassing. When you enter the room, you're inside the painting. It's not a painting, but it's an experience. It is a painting that doesn't exist anymore, that was painted in 2005, and then it became the sanctuary for this man who was seeking healing in the image that had been thrown to the wall out from inside outside, and it had become, and under which you see there is a bed underneath. It's the only place where he could actually find peace and sleep. And yet is a terrifying image. Is the image of a serpent that, I don't know if you see it because I don't see it big, but you probably see it big. It's the image of a serpent that has something soft in it. It also looks like a creature of the ocean, and that holds in its hand a sword that has an Arabic inscription that says in Arabic, La ghaliba illallah, which means only God is victorious. And that has horns like a dinosaur, he says, as opposed to a snake, as a kind of hybrid creature, almost from a science fiction kind of culture. And three crosses on top that indicate the cemetery or death. And that you can see to the right, there is a key, but in a circle. And that is the key of release, but it's a key to which he has no access when he's sick. So Thomas, if you can give us the first black slide with the text. No, not this one. The text slide, the one, oh my God, what number is it? Do you see the, let me tell you, is the, I think it's slide number 7. Can you give us slide number 7? Okay, I see. Okay, good. So in this slide, what you see is what Ilyas is actually telling us about this image, telling me about this image, and his partner when he was explicating the image to me and to us, and he introduces a concept which is the concept of the bridge. Those images in this painting are, he says, if we want to explicate the painting, there is the serpent that is determinant of life. Life, when it is hard, when it is painful, it's like a serpent. It is poisonous. And then there is the sword. It is the force that conquers all things. And next to the sword, he wrote, he, the painter, speaking about himself in the third person, no one is victorious except in God, because God, praise and glory to him, only God is sovereign on all things, he says. And then he goes on to say that there are other signs in this painting. There is the key, which is the shape of imprisonment, he says, because it's sort of within a circle. And then it is Shkil Masjun, is the sign of a person imprisoned in life, because the life of a person without works, without material works, but also without a job, without activity, without an aim, is the life of a person in prison. And then there is this question of what is the release in this picture, and at what point will the release come? And he says this much is the tabir of the painting. This is what is expressed by the painting. And if you go to the next slide, Thomas, he goes on to, and then I would like to kind of reflect with you for a second about this term, tabir, this idea of the image understood as a real manifestation of the possibility of connecting to a different dimension of reality, in which the experience of madness can be visualized or can be imaginalized, can be turned into an image that can be inhabited, in which the person herself has become that image, and that image has become a refuge. And so then this bridge, because the word tabir in Arabic, which means symbol, it means image, but it also means passage, connection, the possibility of bridging two incommensurable worlds, two worlds that contain an enigmatic link, a link that cannot be known. It's an experience of the unknown in the only possible way in which that experience can be inhabited by a human being, which is at the limit of consciousness into another consciousness, as Kader, you were saying, which is the consciousness of a vision in which the viewer is no longer there. And Ilyas doesn't say that he's a prophet. He calls himself a person who is mentally ill, but he also calls himself an artist. And he says that artists have this capacity to inhabit spaces of tabir, inhabit bridges between incommensurable worlds. Artists, the way he sees them, are mediums of sorts that are capable to lend themselves and their experiences to something that at some level can be shared with others in the form of images that belong into a world of images which are not representations in the way in which we understand representations, but are other dimensions of reality. And then the question, comes up, as Kader was just saying, how to discern the images that open up to visionary worlds that can be sanctuaries, worlds that can give us refuge, worlds that would allow us to expand and desire outside of ourselves and connect with others, and how to discern those images with other images that colonize the imagination. Those dreams that in the work of Frantz Fanon, for instance, like the dream of the colonized, were intrusive like machine guns that would come into the psyche of, or the body of the dreamer at night as hauntings, or the dreams that, you know, as I was teaching on Zoom this semester in my university, I started having at night when I could no longer discern my material world around me and my relation to my students from those icons on the screen of the computer. And how to discern this creative capacity of imagination to expand and move and open and inhabit those abysses and those interstices that give, you know, that are passages and bridges to other worlds, and how to live on this kind of brink, on this thin line between images that conquer us and images that instead can open up.
I think there's, can I say something, because I know we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, I think
very short.
I'm done here.
I think there was something you said, Stefania, that I found extremely interesting when you said that before you spoke about the invisible bridge as a possibility of a prophetic experience, okay? And when I was looking at these drawings, when I was thinking about how an artist, without any reason, and sometimes with reason, is producing images, sculpture, film, whatever, I really do believe that there is in this object an ambivalence of being both a prophetic object, but also a prosthetic object. I think, talking about repair, that the drawing you showed us is a prosthesis, is a prosthetic. And I think the agency I'm trying to understand is that, a little bit like Winnicott was speaking about transitional object with kids, you know, the teddy bears, and then the potential space. I think the human mind has this incredible agency to produce prosthetic, to be in touch with the other. These prosthetics are tabir. They are place of a passage. Is actually building invisible bridges, is or she's. But I think this is very crucial because I mean, I think it's a nice way also to hand, because I know that we don't have that much of time. Please, Maria.
Thank you so much. You opened so many questions towards the end of presentation. Also you, Stefania. There was question after question that I have a feeling we should set up a new conference on this, and I think we really should. I don't see questions online. Maybe somebody here has questions, but to bridge time, speaking of bridges, I wanna probe this notion of bridge and passage. As a connection between point A and point B. And I wonder whether what's happening in Reason's Oxymoron installation, there's not a multi-directional movement going on all the time at the same time. So kind of connecting everything to everything rather than what bridge, in my understanding, it might be just, you know, not mature enough understanding of the notion of bridging, but I kind of see it from A to B. And I want to connect to what you were discussing earlier in the beginning, when you talk about the position of a camera within Reason's Oxymoron. Of course, having very brief moment in this exhibition when there could be more than one visitor in the space. There's one, a Reason's Oxymoron is installed on the ground floor, and one can stand on the mezzanine and look down at the constellation. And there was one moment, I swear only one moment, when there were maybe 5 people in the installation moving about. And there was no just person speaking, camera, and the installation, but there were a number of bodies connecting everything to everything within that installation. And I didn't see bridges. I didn't see A to B. I didn't see passages. I saw, just probably rhizomatic structure they're being built by the visitor. So I think we should not, a visitor is probably also not the right word, but people who inhabited the installation temporarily. So I wonder how that idea of a bridge, invisible or visible bridge, connects to this experience that was very different than bridging. That's one thing, and something that Witzke prompted via WhatsApp just now. We at BAC are now really quite intensely thinking about the notion of a portal. So not quite bridge, not quite rhizomatic structure, but a portal. A space in between different realities that essentially signals there is a change coming of just about every coordinate within which you find yourself, time, space, speed, you name it. And so I just wanted to probe these ideas of bridge, transversal connections within the rhizome and a portal, whether if we thought through this installation, through the notion of portal, whether we would arrive into a different kind of understanding of that work, and specifically, in particular, not just the camera that is witnessing or maybe taking the place of a psychiatrist, creating this third space, but really a person who inhabits it and the movement around it. Probably threw too much into it, but it was so inspiring.
No, I agree. I mean, first of all, these bridges we are talking about are definitely invisible. There happens to walks outside the installation, probably not only physically, but in terms of time. Probably later on, like months after, you just remember a moment. I think that the portal thing sounds very interesting, but I have to say that, again, I'm always wondering why I want to do this work, why I want to do a new exhibition. And there's something that really I found more than critical, I found it crucial, is this question of how we can bind the cognitive interaction with the virtual and the psyche. How, like Tarek El-Haris wrote, and also other people have been interviewing regarding this relation between pre-modern beliefs and the digital governance, how we can deal with it. There are so many bridges between them. Like Tarek El-Haris said that he's a Lebanese writer and thinker, and he actually wrote that pre-Islamic beliefs such as rule, which were like kind of half animal, half humans creatures, like the Sphinx, for instance, they will come back now through the internet. So we consider them in Islam as sort of idolatries, so we do not believe in them. We almost even have destroyed them. But in the end, now they are coming back through the algorithmic, the computational governance. And then the question for me here is very much connected to this, again, materiality of the psyche and the, let's say, the non-material aspect of the psyche. I think Catherine Malabou, that we have invited, wrote very well on this in her book, The New Kindred, saying that psychoanalyst is almost like a sculptor. He has to find a way to, to deal with this matter. And then, of course, what you were mentioning, Maria, about the bodies inside the installation is something that I thought immediately, even in our collaboration. Reasons Oxymorons have been presented in different museums, only with screens. It also works. But I was so happy that we could do at BAC at least what was supposed to be physically this experience also. Because it leads again to the panopticon, to the again, before the computational governance, the modernity and the modern control of how to say, of the space. And then of the space, therefore the emotion, as emotion is movement. Okay,
But
Stefania, maybe you
also
can.
an undoing of the panopticon precisely, right? In the
Exactly,
very
yes.
movement from cubicle to cubicle, and through the work of the camera, and through the kind of implication of the therapist into something that is beyond them. And we see it almost in every single interview, right? There is this amazing moment when, I mean, for me, the two amazing women are Christina Theodore and the Rwandan psychiatrist, and both of them, there is a moment in which they're thrown outside of themselves and thrown outside of the position of therapists, which is actually something that someone like Winnicott considered crucial for the possibility of even establishing a transference that is a true connection. And Christine is telling us that a Taure patient is bringing her an object from West Africa, and this object is actually a fetish. It's been activated. She has been told that the object has been activated, and all of a sudden she finds herself and her own family implicated into the invisible world of the West African Traore. And she is both a therapist and someone who's part of a network in which these kind of forces are passed back and forth, and she's thrown out of her position into a different kind of transference. And similarly, the Rwandan therapist, when she talks about her own, after a moment, about her own implication in the work and in the experience of hiding during the violence in Rwanda. But I wanted to say something about the space of the installation, and also what you said about the cognitive dimension, because sometimes, one could even think that this archive of the cubicles, it's a space of memory, is what it's what a memory machine, like an archive, as it was, in Aristotelian in some kind of post-Aristotelian terms, a memory machine, or but the cognitive dimension, I think, opens up to a metaphysical dimension that is cosmic and is not just within the human mind. And I think what comes out of watching some of the conversations in Reasons Oxymoron, and also some of Kader's other installations, the more astrophysical one, for instance, the installation on black holes, and and the creativity of black holes that are both distraction, but then through the process of rejection, they create new universe. We are kind of moved as those who experience those artistic experiments outside of the position of a mind, an individual mind, into a much larger kind of cosmic set of connection and connectedness that are transferences, whether we want to call them forces, with Suleiman Bashir Diagne when he's talking about West African kind of cosmologies, or whether we want to talk about in psychoanalytic terms or in neurological terms. We are talking about connections that are outside of the position of an individuated subject. And I think this is quite remarkable. And to some extent, it is perhaps what Ilyas, my interlocutor in Morocco, was saying when he said that, well, he's in the position of a translator, which becomes the channel or the portal, Maria, with a series of different worlds that are both sort of transmitted through him, but are also inhabited and perhaps transformed and humanized in this movement of encountering something which is demonic, divine, outside of oneself, and that in a fundamental sense maybe is being reclaimed by some artists, by Kader as an artist, by Ilyas, who wants to call himself an artist, as a kind of mediumistic function of the installation that opens up a space where the viewer, the walker, the one who comes in is no longer oneself and can experience something in a kind of trance-like state that, that opens up to possibilities that are unknown to us.
Fascinating. Thank you so very much. I'm going to check here with my fellows in the auditorium whether there is any question. Maybe, who knows? I didn't see anything online. Yes, no? I'm afraid not. But don't despair, there will be opportunities in the future.
So why
soon.
don't we, Maria, if I may, Thomas was showing the slides from Value Dreams. And maybe we can show that while people are thinking about possible questions. Thomas, you have to go back to the first one. No, not that one. The Value Dreams. So this is the installation, the 2020 installation by Kader. Yeah, this one. Kader, do you want to say something about it? Or?
No, I mean, if I start now, I'm afraid it will be too long. I think we have covered different aspects. I think the question of Maria was, for me, extremely interesting because I think we should really care about this movement that constitutes the nature, not only of the emotion, but that define actually the emotion as consciousness. This is actually what it's supposed to be. And I think Darwin already observed that animals who were emotionally acting, there's an incredible works by Darwin on that, by Charles Darwin. They were not only, I mean, whatever closing to the human mind consciousness, but they were just like I think emotion is a proto-language, if you prefer. You see? I think emotion is a proto-language. It's before language. And I'm fascinated by this movement, you know. Before you use the English term, I never paid attention to that. You say they are moved by these images. Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. Mm-hmm. They are moved by these images.
You know, in Arabic poetics, you say that the image moves.
In Arabic, there are two words, actually, which one of them, as I said, is related to poetry. So it's really like emotion related to, I would say, a contrary movement, something from outside that comes to you inside. But ex movere, which has given birth to emotion, has been used in the 14th century in France to relate riots of people starved against the lord or the local lord. I can find you the reference if you want. It's the first time an historian wrote they are uncontrollable. They are into emotion. And there is another word, I forget it, in Arabic that also the philosopher Tunisian Triki, Fethi Triki, has used in a text related to Islam and emotion. And in this text, the way it's referring to Ibn Arabi and other authors from the Ibn Farabi as well, the emotion was used. It's another word, I can find it to you, I forgot it, a classic Fusha word that define emotion as, I mean, another aspect that we also use today when someone is out of control. So I think this notion of consciousness, of emotion, of invisible bridge, of transitional space that Winnicott spoke about, and emotion as a movement think it's something we should care, because not because of the space that is defined here, but because of the agency of that act. Why?
So let me, this was very good strategy, Stefania. We have two wonderful questions that I'm going to read out now. And I wonder whether we could speed up, because we're terribly out of time, but I think this is really important. I'll read them one after the other. First one is from Jack Segbars, and the other is from Andrea Phillips. Thank you, Jack and Andrea, for posing these questions. Jack asks, my question concerns the feedback that is or is not organized of those, sorry, this moved, who participate in your project, Kader. Do participants view the whole installation and or edit of the video? And how is their feedback dealt with? Does this become regenerative feedback of importance? I ask this as it is great to see and hear how different epistemes and geographies become transferred, but I was wondering in how far this is concluding in a definitive artwork. I want you to think through this. I want to read Andrea's question. Andrea Phillips asks, I have a question about collectivity. At Casa de Povo in São Paulo, I had the privilege of witnessing group public psychotherapy. I wonder about the bridge and its direction between individuals, between subjectivities that are beyond or trying to reject psychiatry, then privacy and publicity revelation of the spirit and the camera. And I have one more in the meantime. I'm going to read that one as well. This one comes from Irit Rogov. Thank you, Irit. I have a question about what Guattari called a signifying practice or form of language. I'm thinking about the situation of knowledge production in states of extreme hardship, where the gap between the modes of reporting on knowing or having insight is in the state of asignification. So I leave it up to you to navigate through these three questions. I can answer to the first
question if you want, and then I leave the second one to Stefania. I mean, regarding the feedback of those who participate, I would say they did not participate, to be honest. I think it's a conversation. And it's my aim when I'm editing to remove as much as possible my voice, because the idea is really like to put the viewers in the same position that I was. And of course, avoiding this sort of definitely therapeutical relation. But there is something that is happening also, of course. Particularly when we are in front emotional moment. I've always been enjoying to do workshop and to work both with either craftsmen and women or academic and psychoanalyst. I don't know how to say, I really care about making concrete this Simondonian concept of individuation. I think it's much more than a documentary where you interview someone and then you have an incredible series of cuts in the editing. That definitely, I mean, of course it's more dynamic, but it transforms, I think, the atmosphere of the conversation. I really want also after this, and this is what I did, not with all of them for many reasons, but also for the one who wanted to see them, I continued the collaboration with many of them. For instance, we brought Momargay with Stefania at Berkeley. I mean, in an interview, I'm very close to different psychoanalysts and psychiatrists like Léopold Boissy, because I go quite often to Dakar, Senegal. Aida Silla and many psychiatrists from Dakar are interesting for me in this sort of question that was not spoken today, but I mean, there's an incredible moment in coloniality that has happened in the history of psychiatry in 1972 in Dakar, when Momargay and Colomb have let the traditional healers getting inside the hospital. But then the other people I still work until now with is Gerhard Kubik and Moya Malamoussi, because I think, I don't know, I found them fascinating. They're ethnomusicologists, they are psychoanalysts, they're caring about not only the reason, but the what is the other aspect of reason, I would say. So yes, I definitely continue, and as much as possible, I have shared this production of the project in a sort of symposium workshop context. And for some of them, I'm still until today continuing the conversation. Stefania, you want to answer the second one?
Yeah, I think we're almost out of time, so I will be fast. And there is also Irit's question at the end. But let me first take the question. I think it was from Brazil, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maria?
Yeah, this was questioned by Andrea Phillips, and she talked about Casa do Povo in Sao Paulo, about witnessing group public psychotherapy.
Yes, so, and the question of the group and the question of the camera, if I also, the question of filming, there was also the question of filming in this. So first, the question of the group. I mean, the group is also a chapter in the film, and that we didn't show, but is present in our reflections. And in particular in that chapter, there is a point in which one, El-Ghazwani, one of the psychotherapists, says that what is, how do we, why is it that psychotherapy in Europe is always focusing on the individuated patient, while in fact, what is a family? Like, he was brought up by two sisters who were not his blood relation, that were part of an adoptive family. The family was much more expansive and predicated on very, very more kind of criteria that were not nearly simply recognized within normal kind of European concepts of kinship, even anthropological ones. And that the group was everywhere. And in fact, the group is even, and if I, this question of where is the collective, I encountered it very much in the psychiatric hospital, where in some of the stories of the patients who I met and encountered over multiple months of sometimes or conversations where they kept coming back in consultations, there were whole communities that either would come along, or in the voices of the people themselves, they would be referred to through singing, through chanting of their lives in communities that were at the same time places of exile and places of longing. And the psychiatrists themselves were kind of called into those places in exile of longing. I remember the story of a woman who was working in orange plantations in northern Morocco, and who the psychiatrist was from the same region. And at some point she asked me to tape record a song that she sang for me into my tape recorder in the emergency room, and then to show it to the psychiatrist. There was a song to her brothers and sisters in exile, calling for help and asking and kind of chanting her being lost and asking for, appealing to her community to come to her help in the voice of the psychiatrist from the same region. And I think this is important, even in the work that I have done on spirit possession and religious therapies, in which sometimes in those liturgical events, there would be the whole street that would be there. And it would actually participating with its presence and also somewhat legitimizing what's happening, listening to the voices of the spirits. And there would be novel kind of renewed pacts within the community that were spoken in the altered voice of the spirit speaking through the body of a person in trance. And in relation to, well, in my own work, how to and even just if I go back to the image of the serpent that I was showing, even though this happened in kind of on the roof of a teeny room in a very poor neighborhood in Rabat, Morocco, between Ilyas, Samia, his partner, and myself, in those very images, there is a whole community that is speaking. Those images connect to sort of to representations that are shared, that becomes possible bridges, possible knots that exist in practices outside of the experience of illness, and yet who are kind of synthesized in these moments as new connectors. How did I write these things? Well, I actually never did film. I discussed with Ilyas and with other of the patients, how much could be shown of those experiences. Ilyas told me, and Ilyas and his partner told me that I could show the paintings because they could be useful to other people who have experienced illness, who have found themselves at the threshold of dream and delusion, as kind of anchoring points that could allow a kind of aesthetic or creative transformation of those experiences of illness into something else. And he wanted to share them for this reason. And this partner even said that it was their own story of love, and in a space of illness, they could be shown as something that other people could learn from. And but at the same time, in writing about this, there are necessarily gaps. There are moments, there are places of things that cannot be said. There are things that have to be left obscure. There are cuts that need to be made because the threshold or the limit between representing an experience of illness, someone else's, and attempting to register it and to be in conversation with it, but in a space of intimacy, it's a difficult line, right? It's a smooth, it's a difficult place. It's a place where I think in which the anthropologist, the artist, the writer can only speak from a place of implication, from a place of having encountered that experience and then being able to connect with it, not as an object to be studied, but as something to be related with at some level from within.
Thank you so very much, Stefania. And I'm going to reuse a sentence you just ushered. Cuts have to be made. I am in a position to have to make one, unfortunately, even though there are a couple of more questions that appear in the chat. From Zuni, where she wants us to talk about the individuation in collectivity and trauma and repair healing of trauma before and after arrival. And from Soraya, who wants to talk about this emotion that you quoted, Kader, as a move towards the future. We will not have time to answer these, but I promise that during the last session was in the series of gatherings, which is on the 26th of September, when Kader will come in person to Utrecht to speak to speak with a couple of people involved in a new work he's been producing in the course of this project. Here, engaging with these issues, and here's my promise again, I'll repose these questions, but because they are hugely important and we all appreciate them. And with these words, thank you so very much, Stefania. Thank you so very much, Kader.
Thank you, Stefania. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, everybody here and online, and I very much look forward to the next time. Thank you.
Thank you to you. It was wonderful to do this. Bye-bye.